Good evening. I'm Matt Wuerker, and I have perhaps the easiest job in Washington, D.C. I draw political cartoons about Washington, D.C. And I am here tonight with an esteemed group of international cartoonists to represent political cartooning, a field that some people think is endangered, but actually, if you look around the world, is actually an important aspect of free society. Humor is a funny thing. I mean, humor's a funny thing. And not in the way you think I mean. It's a funny thing in that it works in very strange ways. When it comes to political humor, it's funny how something funny can also be deadly serious. This is especially true in countries where democracy is fragile or in peril, and it's something that political cartoonists in many countries around the world grapple with every time they put pen to paper. I serve on the board of Cartoonist Rights Network International, a small NGO that helps cartoonists around the world who get into trouble for being too funny in countries where being funny about politics is a serious thing. We have a manual for cartoonists around the world that CRNI produced, and there's a passage from that I think sums up sort of what Derek was saying earlier. For the tyrant, the most dangerous result of the cartoonist toolbox is laughter. Insecure heads of state, leaders of failing regimes, political parties that cannot manage their countries, and often corrupt religious leaders do not normally tolerate people laughing at them. A nation of people laughing is a dangerous condition for the tyrant, demonstrating to the world that the people do not fear their leader. That's why when it comes to gauging freedom of speech around the world, political humor offers us a really good measuring stick. Tolerance of political satire is a hallmark of democracy and open societies. When the opening for joking about political leadership begins to close down, it's a very bad sign. It's because of that political cartoonists are often the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to threats to democracy. From Syrian cartoonist Ali Ferzat, who was horribly beaten and both his hands broken when he dared to draw cartoons ridiculing the Assad at the beginning of the Arab Spring in Syria, to Musa Kart, who was thrown in jail for daring to draw Turkey's Erdogan as a cat tangled up in a ball of yarn. It seems that the wannabe tyrants often come after the cartoonists first. So today we brought together some renowned canaries from that coal mine here to talk a little bit about their work on the front lines of the battle for freedom of speech. So come on up, guys. We'll go on down. So while they're getting settled, I will start with introducing Rayma Suprani, who has worked for a number of newspapers in Venezuela, including El Diario Económica and El Diario de Caracas. The critic Alfonso Molina praised her work, writing, quote, "The work of Rayma Suprani and El Universal unites intelligence, sensitivity, and talent to express our life in a country through very sharp vignettes that are not intended to make us laugh, but to make us think. For 19 years, she did cartoons for El Universal, but in 2014, she was fired for a cartoon that criticized the legacy of Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan healthcare system. Rayma was awarded the Inter-American Society Press Prize in 2005 and the Pedro Leon Zapata Prize as Venezuela's best cartoonist in 2000 and also in 2009. This year, she was awarded the Václav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent. No. If I have the slides right, Kevin Kallaugher is next. Kevin is the award-winning cartoonist for The Economist and the Baltimore Sun. He's been doing that's not Kevin's, that's mine. Well, finally we found something funny to talk about. Next slide, please. Kevin Kelleher is the award-winning cartoonist for The Economist and the Baltimore Sun. He's been doing the editorial cartoon as well as gracing the covers of The Economist for 41 years. We're talking more than 8,000 cartoons. A fabulous collection of his cartoons is now in the form of a gorgeous and hefty book, Daggers Drawn, And he's also a featured cartoonist in Counterpoint, a great new online cartoon newsletter devoted to political cartoons. If you like political cartoons, you should subscribe to it. It's free. The World Encyclopedia of Cartoons said of Cal, commanding a masterful style, Kelleher stands among the premier caricaturists of the 20th century. Kevin Kallaugher, ladies and gentlemen, at the end.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rebel Pepper is a renowned cartoonist who started out working in China. His commentary on political and social issues has a large following across much of Asia. His trenchant cartoons drew the wrath of the Chinese Communist Party, and in 2014, he was forced to leave his home. After a few years in Japan, he moved with his family to the US. He now draws cartoons for Radio Free Asia. He is the winner of the hashtag Index Award and the Sigma Delta Chi Award. Welcome, Rebel.
Rebel.
So we're going to do a few questions here and show a few cartoons and talk about the world that these people work in. So I'm going to start with Rayma. Can you tell us about working as a cartoonist in Venezuela? You lost your newspaper job after making fun of Chavez and now work online and from outside of Venezuela. How do you reach your readers? And do you still face pushback from the regime in Caracas?
Bueno, yo creo que el humor traspasa mucho porque el humor es un reflejo de la sociedad que nos, digamos, que nos rodea. El humor es como contar toda la película con un solo cuadro y la caricatura editorial tiene un gran poder porque como cada día hay menos tiempo para leer, pues estamos conectados con el poder de la imagen, con el poder de la risa y con el poder de la reflexión. Eso es una gran responsabilidad y nosotros nos ha tocado pues traducir todo el acontecer histórico en las páginas de los diarios y ahora en la web.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I think humor is something that touches everything, and it's a reflection of what is happening in society. In one single panel, you're showing an entire picture. It's like telling an entire movie in a panel. And what's important is that political cartoons specifically have power. That's the power of the image, it's the power of laughter, and we cartoonists have a huge responsibility. We are the ones who translate what is happening in our countries, where we are, and we do it with humor, and it's something that we need to keep on.
And you do this from, where do you live now? You don't live in Caracas.
No, trabajo, ahora vivo en Florida y trabajo desde mi casa. Ahora soy mi propia editora y creo que la autopista de la web nos ha dado a muchos ilustradores y caricaturistas censurados una autopista importante para expresarnos.
And, oh, I'm sorry.
Right now, I'm living in Florida, and I work from home. So I am basically my own editor right now. And I think what the internet has given to all of us, cartoonists, people who do political satire, political humor, is a road or some type of pathway without censorship. And I think that that's been really important for our work.
I understand that, like our president, you discovered the power of Twitter. How many Twitter followers do you have?
Ya casi 1 millón. Me siento muy perseguida por eso.
I have nearly 1 million now, and I feel like I'm a bit persecuted because of that.
Wait, you want 2 million or no?
No lo sé, creo que son muchas bocas que alimentar y muchos cerebros que...
I don't know, that's a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of brains to feed.
Let's see, we'll move over to Cal here. So, Cal, you've been slinging ink for many years, and you probably have the largest international following of any cartoonist working today. what is it about cartoons that makes them work across cultures and borders? And what is it about cartoons that makes them cause so much trouble around the world?
Well, first, before I answer, I just want to say what an honor it is to be with such a distinguished crew of colleagues and cartoonists. We live in kind of a small community. We all kind of know each other. At least we know each other's work, but we don't often have an opportunity to meet with them. So it's interesting about how cartoons can penetrate across cultures in such a way, partly because humor, there's a lot of things that are universal in humor, I've discovered, jokes that kind of work in lots of different places. So there's an example, there's this joke from the Cold War, a cartoonist joke, where an American cartoonist and a Russian cartoonist are in a bar together. And they are talking about, their relative lives, as cartoonists do. And so the American says, in my country, I can draw the President of the United States whenever I want to. And the Russian cartoonist thought for a second. He says, in my country, we have the exact same situation. We can draw your president whenever we want to. So humor can kind of cross borders because there's a lot of similar sort of sense of humor. Well, the key thing, though, is what is it that makes cartoons particularly damaging or hot topics in any given culture. And there's several things that you alluded to in the introduction. Humor has this interesting place. But there's this other element that's unique to cartoons, and that is they're visual, and they often involve drawing the face of powerful people. Mm-hmm. Because the face is the most valuable thing that we all own. It's a distinguishing characteristic, and plus, it's part of the brand of the individual leaders involved. And if you have a bunch of 6-year-olds like us taking their faces, pulling them apart, and reassembling them in ways that we have control, they really resent it. And it's not just them, but it's their tribe, their supporters, and they come at you. And to add to that is they don't know how to respond to a cartoon because they can't draw cartoons. So they get angry and frustrated, and I think that kind of bubbles up a lot of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Rebel.
Yes.
I imagine working inside China as an independent cartoonist was a bit tricky. Does political humor have a place in the official media in China? And does the Communist Party have much of a sense of humor?
Sorry, my English is not that good, so my friend can translation for me. 1949年之后，那么中国有一个比较短暂的政治幽默的空间，大概是从1980年改革开放开始到1989年天安门大屠杀这个时候就结束了。那么政治漫画家在中国现在是很少的，特别是在习近平上台之后，他们很难有勇气继续创作下去。共产党是根本没有幽默感的，他们必须始终假装自己是神圣不可侵犯的，他们甚至不能容忍对最高领导人的一点点的嘲弄。如果我现在回中国，我可能会被判处10年以上，甚至是无期徒刑。
So, since the founding of Communist China in 1949, there's only been a very short amount of time where there was space for political humor, and that was in 1980 to 1989, which ended with the Tiananmen Square massacre. So, there aren't very many political cartoonists or humorists now, especially since Xi Jinping has been in power. The Communist Party has no sense of humor at all.
Yes.
They must pretend to be sacred and inviolable, and they can't tolerate even a little sense of humor about any supreme leader. So, if I returned to China now, I would probably be sentenced to at least 10 years in prison or life in prison.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but you're like Rayma in that you use social media to reach an audience inside China?
OK， 我在推特上发表作品，然后我一般刚刚发表的作品就很快就会被收录在中国的敏感图库里边，然后在中国的社交媒体上被完全封锁。所以因为受到这样严密的监控呢， 我基本上已经放弃了在中国的读者。然后作为在中国长大的漫画家，为了让更多的英语读者看到我的作品，我现在是将创作的重点转移到这个中美关系上。然后我现在大部分作品也都是中英文双语的。然后社交媒体对我来说是非常重要的，我每天都通过社交媒体浏览很多信息，然后根据我感兴趣也是公众舆论的热点话题来创作漫画。
So the work that I publish on Twitter now gets censored in China almost immediately. So he'll post it on Twitter, and then in China's database of sensitive images, it'll be there almost immediately. So his friends can't post it on WeChat or something like that. So because of such strict monitoring, he's basically given up on his previously huge Chinese audience. As a cartoonist who grew up in China, who now lives in the US, he needs to enable more English speakers to see his work and to understand his work. So he's shifted his focus to be on China-US relations. And his works are starting to be more bilingual. So social media is very important for him. He reads a lot of information on social media every day, creates cartoons almost in real time based on the news that he's seeing on social media and hot topics.
Thanks for that. So we should get back to cartoons and use some cartoons to talk about cartooning. So we have a couple of favorite cartoons. I think we're starting with one of Rayma's. That cartooning is not, political cartooning is not always going for the laugh. And this seems like a really good example of that. So Rayma, would you tell us a little bit about what this is, what prompted this cartoon?
Bueno, es una representación de una imagen que fue muy ruda, que fue la imagen del niño sirio, el segundo niño sirio que salió en los medios y que fue una especie de agresión en la imagen. Creo que a veces nos dicen qué caricatura tan dura, no podemos reír de eso, la gente se siente un poco molesta porque el dibujo no provoca risa y porque proyecta una realidad muy cruda. Pero siempre me cuestiono por qué no lo ven en la realidad y sí lo ven en el dibujo. Creo que el arte, en este caso pues el Guernica de Picasso, representa mucho lo que podríamos utilizar como una iconografía universal para vincularlo como un efecto repetitivo pues, de las nuevas guerras.
Well, this particular cartoon, first you see represented the Syrian Boy. This was the second Syrian Boy who really came out in the news. And it's a very harsh, almost aggressive image. And there were a lot of people who were quite bothered by this image because it didn't make them laugh. It didn't make them laugh because it was showing a very crude reality. And I thought it was interesting that people could see that harsh and crude reality in this image, yet they couldn't see it in real life. And I put that against the backdrop of Picasso's Guernica, which is a universal representation of the horrors of war and these types of attacks that keep repeating. And so this is something that we continue to see.
It's an amazing image. It's really great. Now we'll go to the humorous side of the spectrum with Cal. I believe we have one of his.
Yeah, so this cartoon is not particularly controversial. I just went a bit of topical. You can see, and this tells kind of 10 years of American foreign policy in 5 panels. And kind of very relevant to what's going on today. But one of the interesting things when you know, Matt, when you bring up the thing about you know, a controversial cartoon that might have gotten you in trouble, one of the interesting things when you, as I do, work both in a UK environment with The Economist and the Baltimore Sun in the US environment, shows the amount of protections that we have as cartoonists here, and something that we so much you know, take for granted. And I was kind of, this kind of came to rest with me in another Russian story, as it happens. A few years ago, I had the privilege to be addressing some audiences in St. Petersburg, Russia. And I have spent a lot of time going to various different countries, talking to groups about freedom of expression, satire, and cartoons are in the front line of these elements. And so I was showing a bunch of cartoons to a university group, and there was cartoons criticizing, Bush and Clinton, Obama, and Trump hadn't arrived yet. At the end of it, there was the Q&A, and as tradition would have it, the professor gives the first question. And he says, did you get permission from these guys to have these cartoons, drawing this sort of stuff? And I said, well, actually, we have this thing called a constitution that protects us in this way. And the room broke into spontaneous applause.
Wow.
And it just shows how much, reminded me how something that we take so much for granted, and not only do a very few people on the planet today have this opportunity and freedom, but also in the history of mankind, just a virtual nanosecond of people have had this opportunity to do this. And for that, I feel enormously privileged to do what I do and be able to do it where I do it.
No, it's really true. And that reminds me there's a great backstory to, we do have the First Amendment, but then we also have a Supreme Court precedent. In Hustler v. Falwell, which was decided 30 years ago, was a case where Jerry Falwell decided he was going to sue Larry Flynt and Hustler magazine for making fun of him. And it went all the way to the US Supreme Court, which at the time was run by William Rehnquist. And you would think that the choice between the pornographer and the preacher, it would be fairly clear which side they were going to pick. But it turned out that Rehnquist, in his high school yearbook, had written that he wanted to grow up and be a cartoonist. And he had a soft spot for political cartooning, and the Rehnquist court in Hustler v. Falwell basically said, if you're in politics, you're fair game, and you can't sue for emotional distress. And it's thanks to Mr. Rehnquist that we continue to enjoy a lot of freedom and liberty as cartoonists.
That's right.
So we have one more cartoon to show here, Rebels. I understand that President Xi is now, he's very sensitive about being caricatured as Winnie the Pooh. No, this is true, but you went a little bit harder here than Winnie the Pooh, Adam.
说解释这个话 ，OK， 那我创作这篇话是因为我觉得很可悲的现象是说，大部分中国人在被长期的中共的洗脑宣传教育之后呢，都丧失了思考和质疑的能力，他们已经变成了中国政府的帮凶，就很像那个美国电视剧《行尸走肉》里边那个救世军里边所说的啊，他们每个人都是那个。
So he said that sadly, most Chinese have lost the ability to think critically and don't have the freedom to question. So this is the result of long-term brainwashing. They have become accomplices of the Chinese government through this process. And he made the comparison to the TV show The Walking Dead, where there's a group of zombies called the Saviors, and they all wear the face of Negan.
Yes.
Well, I know that we're between you and your dinner, so first I want to thank the panelists for showing up and sharing their work, and it's a real pleasure and honor. And I want to leave you with a question, which is basically that clearly political satire depends on freedom and democracy and open society. But in some ways, open societies and democracy also depends on political satire, doesn't it? So anyway, thank you very much.
All right.
Please remain.